Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. No one can blame you if you forgot, but on Tuesday, Rhode Island has a primary. For the first half, we assembled a political roundtable to help you get up to speed on the local races voters will finally be weighing in on. Joining me for this political roundtable in a Rhode Island primary primer is political reporter for The Public's Radio, Ian Donnis, and my Target 12 investigative colleague, Steph Machado, and 12 News politics editor, Ted Nesi. Okay, gang, let's dive right in. I think we can all admit that the Rhode Island primary is a bit quieter than the Massachusetts one. In fact, not everyone in the state has a primary to vote in. But let's get people up to speed on the races that there are out there. And Ian, I want to start with you. What are you watching for on Tuesday?
Well, I'm really watching to see how much change we see in the General Assembly. There are 15 primaries in the state Senate, 19 in the House of Representatives. And the big question is, how much gain will progressives make? There are a lot of progressive candidates. I think they are going to make some incremental increases. I know leadership has some concerns about Senator Betty Crowley's seat in Central Falls, Steve Archambault's seat in Smithfield. On the House side, Mario Mendez in Johnston, Chris Millay in Cranston, and Ray Johnston in Pawtucket. I don't think we're going to see a complete overturning of the apple cart as far as the prevailing, more kind of socially conservative Democratic views that prevail in the General Assembly, but I think progressives will make some modest gains.
Ted, how about you? What are you watching for? And to Ian's point, will this be the year of the progressives, or to steal his phrase, are they not going to overturn the apple cart? I think he said. I'm not sure what that one was, but what's your take on Tuesday?
Well, I think, Ian, I like the list Ian rattled off. Those are some of the races I'm hearing about as well, that there's a close eye on. You do have more, I would say a little more cooperation than usual among some of the more progressive challengers who are out there. You have that new Rhode Island political co-op group has been working hard on that. You also have some folks getting help from the Working Families Party, which is another group on the left. But I think Ian's right. I think, there just aren't enough challenges and not enough sign that a lot of incumbents are going to go down to fundamentally shift the General Assembly. But, one thing that happens is if even a small number of people lose, it can change what happens up there because it scares the other incumbents. So close races matter, and even just one or two high-profile defeats can lead to a bill passing next year because all of them are saying we have to pass something, or I might get beat next time. So that's something for people to keep in mind. It's not just about who wins these elections; it's what the people in power at the State House read into them.
All right, Steph, let's, since you are a Providence reporter, let's zoom in on Providence. And you've done, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 3 episodes of your Pulse of Providence program on WPRI.com on 3 General Assembly races in the city. I have to imagine, from the cheap seats, the highest profile one has to be with Senate President Dominic Ruggerio.
Yes, and that's, this is another case of a progressive challenger to an incumbent who's more moderate. We have a few of those in Providence. There's also Tiara Mack, who's challenging Harold Metz, but Ruggerio's seat is being challenged by Democrat Lenny Seo, who's a registered nurse endorsed by that Rhode Island political co-op. And so, it would be a huge upset, obviously, if Lenny won over the Senate president. The Senate president has spent a lot of money, a good chunk of his war chest on the race. His campaign tells me he's taking it seriously. They're not taking anything for granted on Tuesday. So we'll have to see what shakes out there. Another really high-profile race in Providence is Sam Bell's Senate seat, he is the progressive political co-op guy, being challenged by City Council Majority Leader Joanne Ryan, who is, not to say she's not progressive, because she is, but she has the backing, at least financially, of the Senate leadership, which probably has more to say about how much they want to get Sam Bell out of the seat than their support for Joanne, though I'm sure they do support her. But he has just been a thorn in their side from the start, and he likes that. I mean, I interviewed him for Pulse of Providence, and that's his brand. He wants to be the one challenging leadership, and sometimes he agrees with them. Sometimes he supports their bills and pushes for them, but a lot of times he disagrees with what leadership is doing, and he's willing to stand up and say it, and his constituents obviously liked that about him when they elected him for the first time 2 years ago.
So, Ian, Ted touched on this very briefly, and a lot of people, frankly, in the second congressional district might not even realize this is happening, that Congressman Jim Langevin has a primary challenger in Dylan Conley, and some folks in the first congressional district might recognize that last name.
That's right. Dylan Conley is chairman of the Providence Board of Licenses. He came out of nowhere in June to announce he was running a Democratic primary challenge against Congressman Langevin. It's hard to forget, but Congressman Langevin has been in office for 20 years now. He first won election in 2000. I covered that race, and it's hard to believe it was 20 years ago now. But, you know, Dylan Conley says he was inspired by the moment, the kind of racial reckoning, some of the stuff that's in the atmosphere in the country right now. He faces a lot of challenges against a longtime incumbent like Langevin, who's got great name recognition, a very vote-rich base in Warwick, and a extensive campaign war chest, but he has landed a couple of blows. I did a story on how Conley was criticizing Langevin, for example, over owning a lot of stock in the Chinese tech company Alibaba, and to hear Conley tell it, it's a little bit hypocritical for Langevin to do that when he's so concerned about Chinese economic espionage. The response from Langevin is that Alibaba is listed on the New York Stock Exchange, so it's legit for anyone to invest in it. And as you say, the name is familiar because Senate Finance Chairman Billy Conley of East Providence is the father of Dylan Conley. The older Conley is facing some scrutiny for his representation of the controversial Metacomet golf course redevelopment proposal in East Providence. And there he faces a challenge from a progressive named Cynthia Mendez, and that is certainly a race to watch heading into primary day.
So, Ted, before I want to pivot to Cranston, but before we get there, I mean, you did mention that, the Conley-Langevin-Conley race hasn't received a lot of attention. And it seems that Dylan Conley is probably frustrated or is frustrated about that. Why? Explain to people why that really hasn't gotten a lot of traction, especially in a year when there aren't a lot of high-profile races.
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons for that, Tim. I think Ian correctly pointed out that people did not see this coming, right? In June, Dylan Conley suddenly, pretty much out of left field, I would say, decided he was challenging Congressman Langevin. And, this is a race I think if Dylan Conley had pulled the trigger sooner might have gotten more attention because, people... all of politics right now is so defined by the pandemic and I think part of why Joe Kennedy lost in Massachusetts is he couldn't do retail campaigning, which is what his strength in politics. And I think any campaign you talk to, any state is going to say they're being affected by that. And so I think the lack of bandwidth across the press corps probably, I know speaking personally, I was having to spend so much time on the Massachusetts primary that to suddenly unexpectedly have a Rhode Island primary, it was hard to add that to the plate when you're also covering coronavirus. So, I know that's been a challenge for Dylan Conley's campaign. The other thing is I think political reporters and others who monitor this stuff closely, they watch for things like endorsements. And there hasn't been any sign of a groundswell of opposition to Jim Langevin from the kind of key groups and individuals in the Democratic Party. Doesn't mean that couldn't stop Dylan Conley from pulling it off, but it also doesn't necessarily show that there's a lot behind this that could actually make him competitive, with as has been said, a well-funded, well-known incumbent.
All right, so to Cranston now. We're in the final months of the Alan Fung administration there, and there's a primary for both Republicans and Democrats in Cranston. And Steph, for this show, we will widen out your beat to the greater Providence area. You talked to the Republican candidates there. What should people know?
Yeah, so there's two Republicans running in the race. Both of them are current sitting city councilmen, Ken Hopkins, and then the council president, Mike Farina. Alan Fung has endorsed Ken Hopkins, but Farina has the endorsement of the Cranston Republican Party, which is pretty interesting. And I would say that Farina considers himself more of a moderate. He actually used to be a Democrat. And so he has, I think, built a coalition of labor and Republicans a little bit more, whereas Hopkins is I'm the Alan Fung candidate, right? So Mayor Fung is popular in Cranston. He's continued to be popular. He won re-election multiple times, even though he ran for governor twice while he was mayor. And so I think to have the backing of Fung is great for Hopkins. but to have the backing of a lot of other folks in the party is good for Farina.
Ted, our colleague Eli Sherman profiled the Democrats in the race, and you edited that story. What can you tell us?
So I get to use Eli's work without doing it myself, which is perfect. You have Steve Stikos, current councilman. As Ian pointed out, Stikos is more of a nationally a normal Democrat, but in Rhode Island, you never know what a Democrat is going to turn out to believe about politics. So Steve Stikos, he doesn't like President Trump. He talks about that, very big on the environment. He's facing Maria Bucci, who used to be on the council. She has spent quite a bit of money. Her campaign is very well funded. This is going to be an interesting race to see where Democrats in Cranston land, because even as in the first part of the segment, we were talking about, mostly just about what happens in the Democratic Party. Cranston is a place where the Republican Party really matters. It is, I would say now, it is the stronghold left for the Republican Party, even though Democrats are very competitive there because it's still Rhode Island. And Republicans have held the mayor's office in Cranston, I think, for all but 6 years since JFK was president. I mean, that tells you how strong and durable the Cranston Republican machine is, and their ability to get out the vote. And Mayor Fung has been a key example of that. So I think, the Democrats are going to put up someone who knows politics, someone who's been elected before in Maria Bucci or Steve Stikos. There's a third candidate, but he dressed up as a hot dog at a recent debate and has sort of acknowledged he's in it kind of for fun, not as a candidate who really wants to be the mayor. This is going to be an interesting race. It's the second largest city in Rhode Island, one of the biggest cities in our region when you include southeastern Massachusetts. And they're picking new leadership for the first time in over a decade. So I think this is going to be really interesting. And as we talked about, there's all these proxy battles within it and everything. So I'm fascinated to see how that one shakes out.
Might be hard for the hot dog to catch up in this race. All right.
Oh no.
God.
No?
That was a nice dad joke.
All right. Yeah. So we have 2 minutes left here to chat. So let's go around all three briefly. And Ian, I have a specific question for you. As we pointed out, not a lot of high-profile races relative to Massachusetts. Primaries tend to have lower turnout, but there have also been a lot of requests for mail ballots. What are your expectations in terms of turnout, or is it just too hard to tell in a pandemic?
It is hard to tell, but I think that we've seen somewhat of a resumption of normal political activity. A lot of legislative candidates, after initially shying from going out and door knocking, have gotten out there and done it. They're wearing masks, they knock on the door and they back off. I spent some time with Mark McKenney, a state senator from Warwick, as he's trying to hang on to his state Senate seat. So I think you always get fewer votes by far in a primary than a general election contest, particularly in a presidential election year like this one. But I think Rhode Islanders still take an interest in their local races, and the level of enthusiasm is climbing closer to the election.
All right, Ted, the big question for us reporters in the room, which is, well, all of us, when are we going to know? I mean, Massachusetts, the Kennedy-Markey race, we knew that night. But then as we tape this on a Thursday afternoon, we're still waiting for the results for the Mass District 4, which is the district to replace Congressman Kennedy. So when are we going to know in Rhode Island, do you think?
Well, one difference is that in Rhode Island, the mail ballots are taken to the Board of Elections to be centrally counted. And that I think is part of why it can take longer. I mean, the presidential primary in Rhode Island may be a cautionary tale. It took, Steph, do you remember? It took a couple of days.
It took a week. It was at least between 4 and 7 days.
I want to say maybe it took till Friday.
Maybe till Friday,
primary, yeah. For sure. We knew Joe Biden had won the Democratic primary, but to see the margin shifted significantly. So I think watching how these counts have gone in Massachusetts this week, it is to me a cautionary tale about November.
There's also the fact that they are pre-processing the ballots. I'm not sure if they actually did that in June or not, but they are making a big point to put out there that they're doing it for Tuesday, so that, taking them out of the envelopes and doing whatever they can do aside from counting them, so that the mail ballots are ready to be counted at 8 o'clock on Tuesday night. So that could make a difference.
Target 12 investigator Steph Machado, 12 News politics editor Ted Nesi, and political reporter for the Public's Radio, Ian Donnis. Thanks to all of you for joining me for this political roundtable. And when we come back, a bleary-eyed 12 News politics editor, Ted Nesi, will join me in studio to break down a pretty wild primary in Massachusetts. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White, and I am joined by 12 News politics editor Ted Nesi. Ted, good to see you in this new setting.
This is something,
nice,
huh?
I know.
It's
got
like,
that new car smell to it.
I feel like Dorothy, you open the door and everything's in living color and everything. This is great.
So we're taping this on a Friday morning. Tell everybody what time you went to bed last night.
Went to bed. I think I got to bed at 2:30. So once our camera crew left my house at 2 to explain what had happened in the 4th District in Massachusetts, I wrapped up the story. Tried to do a couple of the dishes for my wife and then went to bed.
All right, so, and that is because, as you referenced, the 4th District in Massachusetts, which, to remind everybody, that was the race to replace Congressman Joe Kennedy.
And just so people know, geographically, you get half of Fall River, Attleboro, and Taunton, then up to Boston, nearly Boston.
So, again, Friday morning, let's put up the results from that race that we were waiting for since Tuesday night. And you can see Jake Auchincloss just squeaked this one out in the 4th District with 22% of the vote, followed by Jesse Mermel and then Becky Grossman third. There were 7 candidates in all that people were deciding on. This, again, is the Democratic primary. You know, I guess, Ted, my first question before we got into, you know, how did Jake do it and in such a crowded field, all that, I want to talk about that, but is the grind that seemed to be the ballot counting for the Mass 04 race foreshadowing a potentially messy election year?
It certainly raised more concerns for me about how the counting is going to go this fall, because and what I took away from it was that, you know, it's not that the entire count in the 4th District had problems. You know, Attleboro sent me their results, I would say between 9 and 10 p.m., maybe 10 and 11 p.m. that night. They had the full list. They sent it out to me. And many other cities and towns were able to count fairly quickly despite the much larger number of mail ballots and everything else. But in the end, we run elections, in New England particularly, at the very local level. And so it depends on the competence and organizational skills of local officials. And we saw that Franklin, the town of Franklin, which is up kind of in the corner with Bellingham and up there as you head up toward Boston, Franklin had problems. Secretary of State Galvin had to go to Franklin to kind of oversee what was going on.
He went in person?
He went in person, is my understanding, yesterday.
That.
The clerk had said she thought they had 600 ballots. It turned out there were 3,000 they hadn't counted. So,
wow.
You know, it was both, it's a bit alarming, though in the end the ballots were counted and we know the result, but it was isolated to Franklin in this case. So
in Franklin, you said there were 3,000 ballots uncounted at that time. Jake Auchincloss was up by what, 1,500?
About 1,500 he went into it with.
So that was important. You know?
Yeah, and if we, you know, turning to kind of how Jake won, you know, if you were to look at a map of the results, you'd see a few Jesse Mermel towns right at the top. She slaughtered everybody in Brookline, her hometown. She actually won Newton, even though both Jake Auchincloss and Becky Grossman are from Newton.
Well, isn't that because Jesse Mermel sort of checks the progressive boxes big time, while
Absolutely.
Jake Auchincloss is more moderate?
Yeah,
right?
Jake Auchincloss ran as a more moderate candidate. He's a war veteran. You know, he's a straight white male at a time when a lot of Democratic Party activists want to see more diversity in their party ranks. But he also prioritized southeastern Massachusetts. You know, that district is drawn in a way, you know, it's so weird to me that some people in Fall River share a congressman with people in Brookline, but not people in New Bedford, or even other people in Fall River. It's gerrymandered.
I was going to say, we'll do a whole show on gerrymandering.
Right. So Jake Auchincloss, every candidate who ran in this primary was from Newton or Brookline, but Jake Auchincloss kind of turned himself into the candidate from the southern part of the district, from Fall River, Attleboro, Taunton, by spending a lot of time down there. He won over Fall River Mayor Paul Coogan. He won over New Bedford Mayor John Mitchell, even though New Bedford's not even in the 4th District. And he focused on
Why did Mitchell do that? I don't understand why he would have weighed in on a race that doesn't even impact his community.
I was a little surprised because Mayor Mitchell is generally a bit cautious as a politician. But my understanding from Mitchell's team is he feels strongly that, you know, because of the gerrymandering, you need New Bedford, it needs strong support for kind of regional issues from the 4th District congressman, not just Bill Keating over there in the 9th. And he felt it was important to weigh in.
All right. So before we forget, again, that was a Democratic primary.
he's going to face a Republican.
Yes, Julie Hall, former Attleboro City Councilor who ran unsuccessfully for state rep twice, actually, against Jim Hawkins of Mayor Hero, gave up his seat. She'll be on the November ballot. I think she herself would acknowledge it's always an uphill battle for a Republican in Massachusetts, particularly in a presidential year. But she's on there. They are making a push in the Republican Party to have compelling candidates. So Jake Auchincloss is not yet the congressperson, even if he is the favorite now.
So we were chatting about this before the show, and I find this really fascinating. In the fall, Massachusetts voters will be deciding if they want ranked choice voting. And my assessment of this race, particularly between Mermel and Auchincloss, is if that were in play now, this might have been a different outcome.
I agree. I think, so for people, if you're not familiar with it, ranked choice voting, they have it in Maine now, you might have heard about it there, is where instead of just checking the person you want to vote for once, like we usually do, you rank them. You might say Auchincloss 1, Becky Grossman 2, Jesse Mermel 3, all through as many people as you're interested in. And then they basically do like an instant runoff. So they count up who got all the first place votes. If nobody has 50%, they take out the lowest person and reassign those voters to their second choice people, and they keep doing that till someone has a majority of the vote. And the point is, it's a perfect example in a race like this. You had 7 Democrats still running by the end. Jake Auchincloss won, more than 75% of the voters voted for someone other than Jake Auchincloss, who did stand apart as kind of the more moderate choice in this election.
And most of them were progressive candidates.
Exactly. So you could argue that the voters in the 4th District, the Democratic primary voters, wanted a different kind of set of policy positions from what Jake Auchincloss did, but because there were multiple candidates offering that and no one ever consolidated, Jake Auchincloss just needed 22%, and now he's the Democratic nominee.
Just quickly in the political science of it all, the structure of ranked choice voting, the idea is instead of doing a runoff, which is a separate election, the problem with those, or the criticism of those, is that they tend to have very low turnout, right? In this way, you are able to harness the turnout of the actual election.
Yeah, it's also, I think there's an efficiency argument, right? You bring everyone to the ballot box once and you let them rank their choices then, and then you can do it there rather than, there's a lot of cost and expense and time that goes into a second election. So it will be interesting to see if Massachusetts voters approve that this fall. And I think it'll really change how primaries are done in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I wonder if they're going to look at this race, the Mass 4th. Or do you think there'll be a progressive push?
This will be Exhibit A. I'm already seeing the tweets from people saying, like, you can change this system, unhappy progressives, this fall, and we have to work on that because we don't want to be faced with a choice like this.
All right, I want to shift to the Kennedy-Markey race, and you were the first reporter in the history of this country that has ever been told that a Kennedy is conceding a race in Massachusetts. You broke that story right here in the studios Tuesday night. And you and I have talked a little bit about this, but we both grew up in Massachusetts. We've never seen a Kennedy lose in a Massachusetts race. In that moment when you were at the anchor set at the other end of the studio, did that sort of hit you at all?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have a scoop, it's the adrenaline, first and foremost, and getting it right when you go to say it live on TV. But yeah, I did. I thought, as soon as I said it, I said, wow, Kennedy has lost in Massachusetts. That is a change in politics. But, I think, we've talked a lot about this race over the last year. We, of course, hosted the debate back in June, which I actually think our debate, and not just saying because it was our debate, it was a pivot point in this race. That night, people who remember, and we did show some excerpts a few weeks ago again, their debates had been tea parties up till then. Mm-hmm. And then Ed Markey walked into our studio that night and just ripped Joe Kennedy's head off and really showed, I'm not going to roll over for this guy just because he's a Kennedy. And it was a bare-knuckled race to the end from there. But, I think Joe Kennedy did not ever have a concise, pithy answer on why voters needed to replace Ed Markey. And Ed Markey was able to, and even when Kennedy tried to argue he doesn't do enough, he's not active enough, whatever, a lot of voters would look him up and say, he's the Green New Deal co-sponsor, he's with AOC. A lot of Democrats love that, and it helped him. So I think the Markey people ran a great race. I think the Kennedy people were overconfident for too long, and they were really hurt by the pandemic. Joe Kennedy I was with Joe Kennedy last weekend
he
on the campaign
be out
trail.
Shaking hands, hugging people.
Well, he and I were running through traffic in Fall River as I tried to get shots of him.
That's unsafe.
Which was bad. I told him I could lead the 6 o'clock news if he got hit. But because he wants to run up to every car and shake people's hands, couldn't do that for most of this election. And he's not necessarily as compelling in a media, public speaking environment. So I think that all that affected him.
I know his last name's Kennedy. He'll probably be fine, right?
I don't think we'll have to pass the hat for Joe Kennedy.
Exactly. But what is next for Joe Kennedy? Do you think that was a death knell for him politically?
You know, I have wondered at times if he angered the left side of the Democratic Party so much by doing this that it would make him kind of poisonous in primaries in the future. But I've talked to a lot of people. A lot of people think he has a bright future. He's not by Markey's people, but a lot of Democrats really like him. You know, he is.
He did the Democratic response to the presidential address.
He was
a couple
being
of
talked
years
about
ago
as a presidential candidate. Not so long ago. So, you know, I've heard people suggest, would he run for Attorney General in 2022 if Maura Healey runs for governor? Maybe, you know, there could be a U.S. Senate.
What if Warren is elevated?
Well, I was just going to say there could be a U.S. Senate race in Massachusetts in January if an Elizabeth Warren were to go into a Biden administration. So, you know, I think Joe Kennedy. I think in the end, I don't think he hurt himself permanently with this race, but I do think they're going to look back and wonder if this was the right move at this time, and only time will tell.
If you ever wonder what it's like when Ted comes over to my house to watch football, it was just like that. I mean, talking over the game the entire time. Well, Ted, great job this week. Really an excellent job in breaking the Joe Kennedy news.
We were glued to the 28-3 game, though.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. All right, if you missed any of this program, it's on WPRI.com. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week.